Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this week's edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast. What a season it was for Virginia Tech women's basketball. We'll reflect on their incredible ride to the Final Four as the Big Three announced that they're going to run it back for one last dance. On top of that, day 9 of spring practice is upon us for Virginia Tech football. We have all of your spring ball coverage right here at TSL. That's coming up on episode 292 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, and it starts right now. We record on Tuesday, April 4th, 2023 from our high-tech studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center right here in Blacksburg, Virginia. We welcome you in whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube. If you do happen to be on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're over there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future TSL content. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. First Bank and Trust Company is the bank that puts you first. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and introduce everybody on the set today. To my right, Managing Editor David Cunningham. Across the way, Senior Staff Writer Andy Bitter. Behind the scenes, producing this afternoon, Founder and General Manager Will Stewart. Chris Coleman will be hopping on and joining us for our second segment, talking football later on in the show. And I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. Thanks so much for being with us. Guys, let's dive right into things. Talking women's basketball to start out today. First and foremost, you guys were down in Dallas. How was that experience? And what can you tell everybody about that?
It was cool covering the Final Four, covering Virginia Tech in the Final Four. Of course, I was in Seattle, and then, so I've been all over the place. But it was really cool just to see, see the kind of support Virginia Tech got in Seattle, and to be there was really awesome. They played really good basketball, advanced past the Sweet 16 for the first time in program history, and then won again and went to the Final Four. And this team was so special, and to be there to witness it was so cool. And then the Final Four, that's a different beast. That's really unique. And I had never been to Seattle or Dallas, and Dallas was really cool. I'm glad Andy came down and helped me cover it. We had an awesome time, and really, really special. Disappointed we couldn't cover national championship. That would have been awesome. But it was really cool, really special, and glad we got the chance to go.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see Virginia Tech on that stage. And you see them in the ACC and in Blacksburg and ACC tournament. That's sort of been done before, but never has a Hokies team in women's basketball made it this far. So you're seeing them against the best of the best in college basketball, and they have that attention. And they're beforehand, they're doing pregame stuff the day before, and all the ESPN analysts, Rebecca Lobo, and all these people are there doing interviews about that stuff. They're talking about Virginia Tech. And they're talking about Virginia Tech in the same breath as these national powers like South Carolina and Iowa and LSU. So I thought it was pretty neat to see them there, and they certainly belonged. Probably a disappointing result for them to finish up like that, but it's not like they were outclassed on the court or anything like that. They were right there. It just didn't go their way in that fourth quarter. But, a couple bounces, a couple baskets fall. I think we could be talking about them as possibly being the national champion. So they're in that conversation, and to be there is a pretty remarkable thing.
So you mentioned that. Let's dive into the game a little bit here. Obviously, a disappointing outcome. It was a great game, though. It looked like at that 3-4 minute mark in the third quarter, Tech's up 12. You felt pretty good. Go into the fourth quarter leading by 9, and then Virginia Tech struggled a little bit in the fourth quarter to find their shot. More than anything, Angel Reese and LSU was really, really dominant on the glass, and it allowed them to pull away.
Yeah, I think Andy wrote a really good piece after the game about just the physicality, and that played a huge role down the stretch. Tech limited one of the best rebounding teams in the country on the glass in that first half. LSU kind of got after it. And I thought it was interesting listening to Kim Mulkey talk after the game about how she challenged her team just to win 2 minutes and then to win 2 minutes and to win 2 minutes. It just seemed like LSU had more fire in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter. Tech went to a 2-3 zone, which Kenny Brooks does not like to do. It was like the first time in over a month since I believe they played NC State on February 19th in Castle Coliseum. He doesn't like going zone. They went zone. It helped in terms of rebounding because Taylor Soule was out with foul trouble. And the Hokies had all the momentum. And then everything just kind of went LSU's way down the stretch. And Angel Reese, like you said, kind of took over. I think the physicality really got to Tech. It feels weird because Tech was like right there, and I think everybody felt pretty confident. Like, oh, okay, Tech's 10 minutes from getting to the national championship game, and it was like Tech was playing good basketball. It wasn't like the Hokies were, just kind of holding on. Like they were up 12, 9 points, and LSU kind of just imposed its will down the stretch, and it just kind of got away from Tech.
Well, the officials let them play,
yes,
shall we say. Clearly didn't in the championship game when there were like 50-some foul calls.
Yeah.
There's some horrendous officiating in the championship game, but they let them go at it in that semifinal that we covered, and that was to LSU's advantage. They were the more physical team, and Kitley would get the ball in the post, and they'd have 2 or 3 people on her right away. And she just had nowhere to move. Kenny commented afterwards about freedom of movement and wanted to legislate that in. I think it's a reaction to just how little space she had to operate in that. Now, if they weren't calling it, then you have to adjust to that, and you have to find ways to do it. And, I don't think that's Kitley's strong suit is getting angry and getting physical down there. It's just not her personality and not her style of play. And when that's not happening, you need to hit some shots from the outside. They did second and third quarter when they got back in that, and then nothing was falling in that fourth quarter. Maybe got a little jump shot happy because that's all that was open for them. But, LSU was an aggressor. They were inside. I think they were 17 for 21 in the game on layups.
Yeah.
You can't have that kind of layup line inside and expect to come out on top. I think it was a 54-14 advantage in the paint. It just kind of shows you the damage they did inside. And as it turns out, they can shoot because they shot the ball very well against Iowa. They were not shooting from the ball from outside well against Virginia Tech. So I think if they could have shored up that defense a little bit inside better, and Soule was in foul trouble, forcing them to go into that zone for a while, maybe a different outcome. But, LSU, they were allowed to play physical. They took advantage of that, and they ended up winning it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, too, is second chance points after second chance points. Like we saw multiple times where it looked like Tech was going to get a stop, get the rebound, and turn and go the other way. And a handful of times, LSU got that second rebound, got that bucket, and it's demoralizing. You play defense for however many seconds on the shot clock. Ball goes up, you think you're going to get the rebound, get a stop, go the other way, and have a chance to kind of get a little bit more of a cushion. And Tech was never able to kind of fortify that. LSU kept chipping away, and then it got to the point where I just think a lot of the little things just kind of went wrong for Tech. It didn't seem like Hokies were fully focused and locked in, and it seemed like, I don't know if the moment got too big for them, but simple things where like an inbound play to Kitley where it hits her in the hand, she just dropped it. Or like pass goes to Kay on a trailer where she's just trying to set up the offense and she just mishandles it and it goes out of bounds. And just like little things where Kayana Trailer was too casual walking the ball up the court and got a 10-second call. And I think Tech was just too casual a little bit at times. And LSU was just better. And it stinks when you put it in that light that the Hokies were 10 minutes away from getting the national championship game. But like Andy said, the physicality just kind of got to him, and it was just more of a game suited for LSU's liking down the stretch.
Wildly enough, the Tigers go unconscious shooting the ball in the championship game, but heading into the Final Four, where they also didn't shoot tremendously, they had hit 11 three-pointers the entire tournament. Georgia Amore alone had 22 going into the Final Four. So that was just an interesting contrast there, how Kim Mulkey's team was really able to amp it up in the semifinal and in the championship game. Seems like the recipe to beat Virginia Tech this year, when you look back and you reflect on it, was the couple of games they lost, 4 or 5 in total, was against a team that played them incredibly physical, specifically Kitley inside. You remember back to the Duke game at Cameron, that was kind of Duke's recipe for beating Virginia Tech, was beating them up.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was pressure. I think the one outlier there is Notre Dame. And I think that was a point where Tech was still trying to find its footing. Had only played a couple games without Ashley Owusu, who had gone out with an injury, and Tech's still trying to figure out what it wants to do offensively. And I think if they had played in, even if Olivia Miles was healthy, I think if they had played later in the season when Tech was on its roll, Tech would have been fine. Tech played at Clemson and lost because of the pressure. Tech played at Miami and lost because of the pressure. Tech played at Duke and lost because of the physicality. And Tech played LSU and lost because of the physicality. And I think that was I think a lot of it had to do with how teams defended Kitley. And in some cases, I think the Duke game was how teams defended Amor. And other times, the shots were falling and Tech was getting good looks. And I think, I don't know, it felt like a lot of times against LSU, especially in that second half down the stretch, Hokies couldn't get anything going inside, so they had to resort to jump shots, to threes. And when those aren't falling, there wasn't much of an offense. And if that is the game plan and you're not scoring and then you can't defend on the other end as well, just a bad recipe.
Yeah, I just don't think they had their best looks in the fourth quarter. I think Kitley had one shot, one field goal attempt. I know Sol was in foul trouble early on. That's kind of part of the reason they went to the zone, and she didn't play as many minutes as she had before, and she's just like pure energy when she's out there. And I think not having her out there for long stretches, that affected this team in a way. So I think a lot of people liken it to the 99 football championship game where they're leading after three quarters and couldn't keep up. I think it's slightly different in the fact that I thought Florida State in that football game was the better team. And Michael Vick might have been the best player out there, but Florida State was the better team. I don't know that LSU was that much better than Virginia Tech. I think they just played better in that fourth quarter and won it, and credit to them for doing that. But Virginia Tech was every bit the one seed that they were put in the tournament as, and they played that way up to that point. They just had a bad quarter, and that's why we're talking about them somewhat forlornly here instead of talking about this championship that they could have won. But disappointing end to the season, but certainly doesn't take away from all the accomplishments and sort of this incredible journey that they had all year.
Andy, you transitioned so well. Bringing up next, I was going to talk about where does this rank all time. An incredible season. The outpouring of support for this team has been unbelievable. It was like a team that in so many ways you could fall in love with and cheer for, and they're just full of class. And like I could sit there and listen to Kenny Brooks in a press conference like a podcast for a half hour. I love listening to Kenny Brooks talk, and they're just so easy to root for. I think all of Hokie Nation knew that and poured everything they had into following this team. And it showed when they got off the bus coming home from a Final Four after a loss to a huge amount of support and people in attendance to see them get off and cheer them on and everything like that. So all time, where does this team rank in Virginia Tech athletics history? You'd have to think maybe football's number one. Is this two? Does it compete for number one? What are your thoughts?
You're never going to top that. Short of winning the national championship. And even then, I don't know if you top the impact of that 1999 team.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, that put Virginia Tech on the map.
As a school, too.
As a school. I mean, it did so much for the university and raised the profile of obviously the athletics program there. I mean, they're in the ACC because of that. They're probably not there if they didn't have that kind of success around the turn of the century. So that's always going to be number one in my mind, and maybe if they ever can get back there football-wise, that could challenge it. But I'm hard-pressed to find a better number two. I mean, there's some soccers in there. Baseball and softball didn't quite advance as far last year in their really magical runs there. There's that softball team with Tincher that made Oklahoma City. Didn't quite get to the championship either, but that was a very memorable run. But yeah, I'm probably putting this second in the running for second. I can't think of all the other schools. Their programs are with it.
How about a lot of people, this was brought up while I was watching the game with Nick Brown and Carter Hill, who obviously everyone knows here at TSL. And they said, and I asked, and obviously the impact is bigger. There's a big difference between a Final Four and a Sweet 16. But they did talk about how big it felt when Buzz had taken the men's basketball team to a Sweet 16. You're playing the top dogs in Duke, who are a 1 seed at that point. They were a 4 seed in the tournament. That was a new height for the men's basketball program as well. I think you still put this Final Four run ahead of it, considering you went 2 extra rounds and you were a 1 seed instead of a 4, and you were ACC champs. But I think that's in that conversation for top 5 as well. What are your thoughts?
If they had beaten that Zion Williamson team, and they have the layup right there at the end, I don't have to remind Hokies fans how close that was, that elevates it to a whole nother level. And I will say a men's Final Four. I was in school at Wisconsin when Wisconsin made the Final Four for the first time since like 1940 something or whatever. And the school went ballistic. I mean, it was students out on State Street, just wall to wall for like a mile. A men's Final Four like that sends a campus into a tizzy like that. So if the men were able to ever advance that far, I think that might eclipse this. But it's just a great run. It was just a great run by a really, really good team that, has a bunch of pieces coming back next year. Maybe they can make it back.
Yeah, I think Andy hit the nail on the head with football. Even when men's and women's soccer both had great runs, but the men's soccer team was like a number 7 seed or something like that, right? Women's soccer was a number 1, I believe, and lost to the number 1 seed Florida State. But in terms of like this feels, I would say this is probably number 2. Like, I think the only thing that has ever been bigger is that Michael Vick 99 football team. Just the support, and like this is only, this Virginia Tech team had a legit shot to win the national championship, and as we've mentioned, had the Hokies beaten LSU, it would have only been the second ever time Virginia Tech had played in the national championship game, along with the 99 football team led by Michael Vick, and I think it means a lot, too, that it's in a women's sport. Again, Virginia Tech's never won a national championship. But the fact that this team won the ACC championship for the first time in program history, that had never been done. Essentially finishing a tie for first in the ACC regular season standings, but it was a tie for second. They finished, half a game behind Notre Dame, who won it, but was a number 1 overall seed, won 15 straight games, and the teams they beat were really high quality teams. Like, they blew the doors off multiple teams down the stretch in the ACC tournament that ended up going to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8. This team did some really historic things. I think it might be a little bit difficult to put in perspective now, considering it's so recent. But this team accomplished some incredible things that nobody's ever seen at Virginia Tech before. I do think the men's basketball team in 2019 is special because of the Sweet 16, and that program had never really been to that height before. And had, like Andy said, had the Hokies won and gotten to the Elite 8, I think then you're talking, like, it's completely different. But this team made the Final Four. And when you get to Dallas, like you can feel the impact when you are in the city where the Final Four is. It's just a different animal as far as just the press and the way everybody handles themselves at the Final Four is just different. And the fact that the Hokies made it there for the first time in program history, it says a lot. And I think it was a great run. And I don't know if anything besides football can really top it. I think, you've had if baseball or softball made made the finals of the College World Series, then I think it'd be one thing. If wrestling finished second, maybe, but this is like Tech finishing 3rd or 4th, and it's really just hard to kind of put anything else ahead of it because of not just the Final Four, but what they accomplished all year, right? It wasn't like they just, they were 8 seed and they made it to the Final Four and lost. It was like they were dominant all year. They won 31 games. They had not won more than 28 in program history, or 29. So they accomplished a lot of feats along the way. Elizabeth Kitley, 2-time ACC Player of the Year. She, as we'll talk about in a sec, she's coming back. She has the chance to be the 3rd ever ACC player to be a 3-time Player of the Year. Like this team is accomplishing things that nobody in the ACC, nobody at Virginia Tech has ever accomplished.
So as all great things must come to an end, it's wild. You have a situation here where rostered right now, you have Elizabeth Kitley, Kayla King, Georgia Amore, and then after her redshirt year, Carly Wenzel. And then between graduating players entering the transfer portal, etc., next year's roster at its core is going to be familiar faces and some of the most important pieces, but you're going to have a lot of new faces in the rotation as well.
Well, so as this today, we're recording on Tuesday. Two players, Maddie Vasecki and Charlie Dunn, two freshmen, entered the transfer portal on Monday. That's along with Taylor Guyman, who could have come back, but she had a job lined up. Ashley Owusu told reporters after the ACC tournament that she was not going to use her fifth season. And then you've got a couple players that are graduating: Clara Ford, Chloe Brooks, Taylor Soule, Deasia Gregg, Kayana Traylor. Like, this is, in a way, it's kind of a rebuild, except you've got two All-Americans that you're rebuilding around, along with Kayla King, who's an all-conference player. So, and Tech's got 4 top 100 kids coming in. You got 8 scholarship players right now. Obviously, Kayla King and Elizabeth Kitley announced they were coming back. It's a good core to build around, and Kenny Brooks has worked his magic in the transfer portal before. As I wrote yesterday, it's just, I think it's funny that Kenny Brooks' best recruiting class is coming in at the same time after the Hokies are coming off a Final Four appearance. But that's just kind of how it's working out. Brooks has worked his magic before in the transfer portal. Soule, Traylor, Gregg, even Taylor Emery, Lydia Rivers, Tosh Cole before then. They've gotten really good players out of the portal before. I'm curious to see if it even elevates the level of players they can get out of the transfer portal now.
This is just sort of college basketball these days. Like, you talk about a rebuild, but you're rebuilding your roster every single year. I mean, the days of expecting 3 to 4 years of development out of each recruiting class that you have, those are over. People will leave, people will transfer, and you'll have a good percentage of that on every roster that you have every season. But if you start out with 2 potential All-Americans or 2 returning All-Americans, a very good 3-and-D player in King that adds another veteran to the group, I mean, how attractive is that going to be for transfers coming in? You've got a pretty good freshman class coming in. I bet you a bunch of transfers out there go, hey, I want to go play with those girls. Because look at what they did last year. Look at how I could fit into this offense or this team. And, you can be pretty successful. So I think there are a lot of schools that would trade places with Virginia Tech right now in terms of roster construction, even though there are some unknowns.
Right.
They'll fill that in as time goes. But when you have Amore, you have Kitley, I mean, you're good to go next season. You'll fill in those gaps pretty well, I think.
Yeah, the people that Tech has, like the personnel, is attractive. I also think it's interesting to mention that, like, when Asia Shepherd got drafted and by the Aces, for any college basketball player who aspires to play at the WNBA level, Kenny Brooks and Asia Shepherd, even Becky Hammond, the Aces head coach, they mentioned how attractive the style of play Virginia, like the style of offense, the system that Kenny Brooks runs at Virginia Tech, how it kind of blends into the WNBA game. So, like, all the tools are here for Virginia Tech to succeed, right? It's the players. The players are high caliber. Virginia Tech went to a Final Four, won an ACC championship. If you want to go play at the next level, it's the right system for you, for most players, you would think. Now it's just, who can Virginia Tech get to come? And I think, like Andy put it, I think there are a lot of people in the portal that are probably sitting there going, man, like, this is a really cool destination. As Kayla King put it, Virginia Tech is on the map now. Like, the Hokies were successful back in 1999 and successful in those early mid-2000s. The Hokies went to a Final Four for the first time in program history. This is something new. Nobody in the program has ever experienced this before, but now they know what it takes to get back there. And they've got a big core returning that was the large part of why the Hokies got there in the first place. I think we're going to see a lot of movement, but I think there's going to be a lot of success in the future.
So you have to expect Kenny. Obviously, he's going to have to hit the portal. He did it last season. He did it pretty well as well, bringing in Taylor Soule. And even though Ashley Owusu, her role kind of decreased throughout the year, coming in, she was an All-American. So that was certainly a marquee get out of the portal. So you look at this upcoming year. We talked about Wenzel. coming out of her red shirt. We talked about the big three being back and additions in the portal. Number one, what is Kenny looking for in the portal? What type of player? What are the needs of this team right now? And then number two, if the right additions are made, are we looking at another national championship contender here with the core three back?
Well, I think he would like to just keep Taylor Solenke on the trailer if he could.
Obviously,
I think you need some size. Tech's front court is so limited right now. It's literally Elizabeth Kitley and then 2 freshmen. So you need front court depth. You're a little bit more set in the back court. You got Georgia Amore, Carly Wenzel's still here, and she redshirted, and Kayla King, and then you bring in two freshmen. So you probably want to add another veteran backcourt piece to play alongside King and Amore, and then you need to add a 4. But then I think there needs to be a depth piece or two. So I think Kenny Brooks is probably sitting there looking at adding 3 to 4 transfer portal pieces. Because if you do that, then you've got a solid rotation, and then you try to have freshmen fill in the gaps whenever they can. I don't know what the impact of some of these freshmen are going to be. They're 4 top 100 kids, right? They're highly recruited kids. 2 guards, a forward, and a center. It's a good recruiting class, but who knows what their immediate impact is going to be. But I think you need to try to fill out the rotation with experienced players. As for the second part of your question, this is, if everything goes to plan, this is a team that will probably be, whether they're picked first, they will be probably top 3 in terms of ACC, in terms of winning the championship next year. And this is a national contender team if all the pieces fall in line. May, June, July, maybe once we get towards August. But if everything falls in line, Elizabeth Kitley and Georgia Amore are probably 2 of the top 3. Haley Van Lith returns, Olivia Miles returns, Tanaya Latson returns, but they're 2 of the top 5 players in the ACC, and they're on the same team. And then you build around it, and if you can put the right pieces in the right spots, you're looking at an ACC champion, a team that can compete for an ACC championship again, and potentially make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. But of course, it all kind of depends on, how the rotation figures itself out. And I wouldn't expect Kenny Brooks to hit on every single transfer, right? Over the last couple years, we've seen, whether it was Owusu, who didn't have an impact for a lot of this year, or whether it was players a couple years ago. Rochelle Norris, nobody knows that name, but she was a player 2 years ago. She was supposed to have a big impact. She tore her Achilles or an ACL. She had a big injury before the season. She was a West Virginia transfer, and she never played. And I wouldn't expect him to hit on every single player, but his success rate is higher than, he hits more than he doesn't. And I think, at this rate, I think the players are going to be of a higher caliber, knowing now that they can play alongside All-Americans and potentially get to a Final Four ACC championship again.
You just hope to be in the mix, right? There's no guarantees in basketball. You can be seeded whatever you're seeded, and then it comes down to bracket luck. It comes down to a cold shooting night. When you get to that single elimination situation, anything can happen like that. So I think you build your team for the long haul. You hope to put yourself in the best situation, but that's why when these tournament opportunities come around, you just have to seize them, because there's no guarantee you're going to be back. Like look at Purdue men's team this year. Like, we'll be back next year, and they lose in the first round as a 1 seed. You just never know. So you'd like to think, they can get back to the Final Four, but maybe the path's tougher next year. Maybe they don't have as high of a seed. Maybe they just have an off shooting night, or run into somebody that shoots 60% from 3 one night. That happens along the way. So I think that's why you look back at the season, you really have to cherish the run that they had in getting this far, and just how everything came together in the second half of the season, because it was really beautiful to watch. Just the way this team played together just sort of had a flow to them, and we're playing very well together.
Yeah, and because it's hard to do. Like, getting to that point is extremely difficult. I think like when people look back on this season, they'll go like, man, Virginia Tech really made the Final Four. Like, Virginia Tech was one of the 4 best teams in the country and had a legit shot to win a national championship. That's not something you say very often. Cherish it. Like, and I think it's hard to, in the moment, so recent, we're a couple days removed from it. A couple days ago, and Andy and I were in Dallas, but it is real. Like, Virginia Tech was a legit contender.
So I want to delicately transition and have a careful conversation about the Ashley Owusu situation. We'll preface it by saying we're going to share the facts. We're not going to speculate or anything like that. So everything we're presenting is factual. And we did our research a little bit on this. David saw some things firsthand, and then we'll first go take it to Twitter, though, where and that's the thing. That's how you know it's facts, is they're putting this stuff out on Twitter, right? The players themselves that are involved are putting these tweets out. So
yes, only facts on Twitter.
I guess that could have been worded
incorrect
better.
information on Twitter.
Right. Well, so a situation takes place where it appeared that Ashley Owusu did not partake in being on the Virginia Tech bench for the second half of the game.
No, that's a fact. She was not on the bench for the second half of the game.
That is a fact. And so some Twitter, like 20 minutes after the ball game, when LSU wins the Final Four game and is going to the national championship, they take to Twitter. Somebody put out a tweet that said, after that foul, Reese just walked up to her former teammate Ashley Owusu and said, "Awu, tell him," with eyes. Angel Reese, after being tagged in that, tweeted that and quote tweeted that and said, "Free my dog at Ashley Owusu." And then Virginia Tech players started to take to that. So Kayla King responded to that and said, "She's been free." So there's that. And then when you continue to go through things that Tech players had said throughout, this one was kind of a big one because everyone kind of got in on it. Ashley Owusu had put out, or someone had put out that Ashley Owusu isn't on the bench anymore. What happened? Kiana Traylor then tweeted, I don't know, check the LSU bench. And then everybody retweeted it. Kayla King, Taylor Soule, Elizabeth Kitley all retweeted Kiana Traylor's quote tweet to that. And I know this, now that we're going through this sounds like middle school drama in some ways. But and then yesterday or the day before, Angel Reese had posted a picture of her and Ashley Owusu.
I believe it was her mom. Like, I believe it was not Angel Reese's actual count, but it was somebody somebody close to Angel.
Let's see.
The picture of her and Owusu.
There's a picture of her and Owusu.
Yeah.
And this is Angel Reese tweeted it, looks like. And it's a smiling face. It's her and Owusu. Owusu's dressed up in her Tech gear, so clearly this was at the Final Four in some capacity. And so take what you will, but I know, David, you saw some things, and it just kind of has Tech Twitter in a frenzy, and it was worth bringing up considering the players had gotten involved with it on Twitter right after the game had ended.
So first of all, again, I should reiterate that Owusu told reporters at the AC tournament in Greensboro that she's not using her fifth year, that she's not coming back. So when we talk about here's the roster for next year, that's because Owusu had told the media that she's not coming back. After this, I think it's obvious that she's not welcome back. I was sitting behind the team bench. I witnessed firsthand Taylor Soule get up and say something, and then the coaches get up and, two assistants get up and say something to Owusu during the game. Owusu got up and went to the locker room. From everything I've been told, essentially Owusu and Reese were exchanging words during the game to the dislike of Taylor Soule and some of the staff members. And they got annoyed that was going on, and basically, Soule got the assistant coaches to get Owusu to go to the locker room. And when a Virginia Tech spokesman was asked about, why was Owusu in the locker room, they were told, the word was that she was not feeling well. But yeah, I think those are kind of the facts, and people are going to speculate what actually happened, what was said. I'm not going to say that she was a locker room cancer, but she had been subtweeting all through February and March, basically saying that I can still ball and I can still play. And while I'm not saying that she can't, there was nothing holding, like when Kayla King said she been free, like there was nothing holding Owusu back except for herself. Kenny Brooks said that that she was back and healthy. There was another reason clearly why she wasn't playing. And, Owusu had all the tools, like they were in front of her, but I think it's important to note that she missed about 2 crucial months of development this season. And it seemed like whenever she got on the floor, she never really made a good impression after she got back from breaking her pinky. She never really made a good impression. And it got to the point where, who were you going to take off the floor? Georgia Amore is an all-American player. Kayla King, Kayana Traylor are playing really well. Traylor had some big buckets down the stretch for Virginia Tech, some really big games. It got to the point where everybody on the floor was gelling so well, and Owusu just didn't fit into the mix. And I think it got to the point after the season where everybody's done. There's nothing to lose. But those are the facts. That's what happened during the game. She went to the locker room, and I think the rest is history. And it's very interesting to see how it developed as the season went on. But she never really played a big role, and I think a lot of that was because of she missed so much time and never really had a chance to delve into the system and kind of get antiquated with how Virginia Tech wanted to play. It would have been kind of a meet in the middle thing. Virginia Tech would have met her in the middle in terms of everybody adapting to each other, and it got to the point where Tech came up with its own identity and Owusu wasn't a part of it.
I didn't see any of this happen. I was up in the platinum level, where you need binoculars to see the court. It wasn't a big deal that I was up there. I was a secondary guy. But David Teal, right next to me in the platinum, they couldn't get him better seats. I was a little upset about that. But yeah, I didn't see anything going down there. But you look at the situation, and she's a very talented player, and she got hurt, and Virginia Tech came together when she was out, it feels like. And they found a rhythm. They win 15 straight. They found a good rotation, and she just didn't fit the way they were doing it. I'm sure that's tough for a young athlete like that to take. But if you're Kenny Brooks and things are rolling and things are working well with the group that you have, why switch that up at that point?
Right. Definitely doesn't take away from what a fantastic season it was. Guys, thanks so much. It was a great chat on women's basketball, and look forward to flipping the script on the other side of the break. We're going to talk a little bit of spring football with Chris Coleman and the rest of the crew as well. But that wraps up our women's basketball talk. We'll be back after this. Welcome back, Hokie Nation, to episode 292 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The TSL podcast is also brought to you by Virginia Green. Virginia Tech is partnering with Virginia Green to help create healthy lawns all across Virginia. Register for a chance to win free lawn care with Virginia Green for the 2023 season. All right, for our football discussion today, we've swapped out for lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Thanks so much for being here, Chris. Andy on set as well. David in the fourth chair, and Will Stewart behind the scenes. Let's dive right into things with football. But first, before we do that, I do just want to mention Mike Jones, associate men's basketball head coach, will be leaving for Maryland. Immediate thoughts, Chris, for you and David. How does this impact things? Rodney Rice played for him at DeMatha. Just your immediate thoughts.
Depends on what happens with Rodney Rice, and it depends on how he's replaced. I don't think you'll get an exact like-for-like replacement where you get somebody coming in from DC who's just going to lead you to different heights of recruiting in that area. The next coach will have different strengths and different weaknesses. But for me, whether you look back on his era as associate head coach and say it's a strength or say it's a success or a failure is really going to be dependent on whether Virginia Tech retains Rice. They've already lost Darren Buchanan, who he recruited. So if they lose Rice, that's 0-2. And when you think like the primary reason he was brought to Virginia Tech was to recruit DMV players. So I think if you retain Rodney Rice and he goes on to have a good career, that ends up being a successful tenure, if you can call 2 years a tenure. But if not, it's probably something that Mike Young will maybe wish he'd done a little bit different.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that Mike Young never, like hindsight's always 2020. I'm curious to think what would happen if Mike Young gone a different route, right? How would this team have been different? And I don't know. Like, I don't know if it would say it was 2 years was wasted, but like Tech just wouldn't have really made any progress. If Rice leaves, well, Buchanan already left, Jones left. AJ Swinton is a 2024 kid. Gio, you and I were talking about this earlier. He has connections to Mike Jones, but I think it's kind of too early to tell what happens with him. But like if nobody from the Mike Jones tree stays, was there ever really an impact? And I don't know if it's never necessarily a positive or a negative. I don't think it's necessarily a waste of time. I just think it's like other progress could have been made, maybe. I think Mike Young probably always had to know that Mike Jones was going to go somewhere at some point. Like, you obviously don't know, okay, he's going to stay for 2 years and then he's going to go somewhere. But I do think it's interesting that that Mike Young chose to go that route. And who he replaces Mike Jones with is very, very important. You already know what Kevin Giltner and Christian Webster bring. They're both solid recruiters. You need to bring in a guy that fits in the emptiness or the space, I guess, fills the void that does something that those two do not do necessarily. And I think Chester Frazier, who was there before, really did a good job of that. He was very defensive minded. I'm curious to see where Mike Young goes with that hire.
All right, let's go ahead and flip the script over to football and dive into our football conversation today. First and foremost, I know, Andy, you were at practice today. How was that?
It was heating up because we were sort of in the shade and the sun was coming closer to us. I think it was practice 9 out of 15
number 9,
that they had. Brent Pry thought it was a little sloppy near the end. We go out there for interviews and he's addressing the team and he's talking in his head coach voice. We're just like, we need to get better. It's like you could hear it across the entire way. And he was really sort of haranguing them about sloppiness at the end and maybe a little extracurricular stuff. He's like, that leads to mistakes and penalties and you need to keep your head and all that stuff. So just sort of a reminder. I think he said last week they were, sort of up the intensity a little bit in terms of, full contact periods and evaluation times like that. And that was maybe a little bit of carryover from that. But he just wants them to keep their head a little bit. I think this happens in spring ball when you get to a certain point. He just reminded them that of several times. But other than that, I don't know. It was another spring practice. And I tweeted out sort of what the first group out there looked like today. And apparently it sent Twitter into a frenzy about like, oh my gosh, this guy, don't read too much into that. That was the first team today for what we saw today. Wide receivers are going to rotate all the time, different packages. Running backs, they've got a couple of them. They're going to be in there. The Grant Wells thing was probably the thing that people got, most worked up about. But listen, it's April. We're still 4 months away. We've said this on the last podcast, said this on this one. Quarterback is far from decided right now. So there's still a lot to play out. That's just the order they went out there today. So as much as I want to read into stuff in the spring, I also just want to say, hey, step back a little bit. This is spring practice. It's a time to experiment, do different things, get an evaluation of these guys and work towards the summer.
Last thing on today specifically, who was in, who was out, who was back? What can you tell us about personnel?
Alan Tisdale was back. He'd been dealing with some stuff, sounds like injury-wise. He was out. Jaden McDonald. I always have to make sure I have the right McDonald brother. He's getting closer to return. He was out there. Daquan Wright, he had a pull, a hamstring pull, I would assume. He was been out for a little bit. Was about 3/4 back doing some stuff today. Dawan Lofton was back out there. I'm trying to think, was there any others? David, can you remember any?
Dorian Strong was doing some one-on-one
Dorian
work.
Strong, he was out there. Ishmael Feinlater, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name. He had some shoulder surgery. He had his arm in a sling, so he's out. But again, spring ball, guys are kind of working back in a little bit. Ollie Jennings has been working in slowly, I think. So that's why
he said the same with like Feldarius Payne too.
Yeah, you tweet out what the lineups are and people freak out. It's like, well, guys are at varying stages of recovery from the regular season, so that's going to play into that as well.
I want to talk a little bit about the offensive line. Chris, I know you have an article coming up that you'd like to tease a little bit here, but the offensive line in general, your thoughts, and that can kind of drive the early portion of our discussion today.
I think it's got to be better than it was last year, and I think it will be better than it was last year. I was looking back, doing some work on PFF this morning. I was looking at the top grading offensive linemen of the Vance Vice era. Vance Vice put a lot of players in the NFL. Parker Clement's 2021 season is one of the top 10 best individual seasons for a Virginia Tech offensive lineman in the 6 years under Vance Vice. And then he dropped off by like 20 or 25 points in PFF last year because he was hurt. So I think you're going to see him get back to closer to the old Parker Clements this year, which is going to make Tech a better offensive line. Generally speaking, though, what I learned from doing that article, comparing the Cincinnati offensive lines to the Virginia Tech offensive lines, and there's even a little bit of Alabama comparison in there in terms of player rotation and how many guys are actually in and out of the rotation, what is quality depth and all that. But the main thing I learned is that like Tech always had higher grading offensive linemen than Cincinnati under Vance Vice when Ron Crook was at Cincinnati. But Cincinnati's running game and offense in general was usually better than Virginia Tech's because the Cincinnati offensive coordinator, who is at LSU now, he ran a packaged play offense, an RPO offense that really helped the offensive line overcome some of their talent limitations. I think when you evaluate Virginia Tech's offensive line this year, you have to look just as much at Tyler Bowen as the guy who designs the offense as you do Ron Crook in terms of his development of offensive line.
It seems like such a key position for this team's success this year. And if I'm picking most important positions on the offense, I mean, yeah, quarterback, because that is the most important position, but offensive line needs to take a significant step forward. And you look at the personnel they have there, a lot of question marks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Xavier Chaplin, they're kind of slotting him at the starting left tackle. He's played 20, 30 snaps in college before.
25, yeah.
It's not much. You're moving Braylon Moore into the first team there. He's been pretty consistently there at left guard. I would expect Clements to bounce back, but Cade Moore is switching positions. That right guard spot, it sort of seems like the fifth one that is not quite settled yet. And then the depth, there's not a ton of depth. It's a very young group. You look at the scholarship lineup, and it's all second year or younger almost, except for a handful of guys. So, that makes the offense go. You talk about protection for the quarterback. You talk about holes for the running backs to run through. If the offensive line's not getting it done, then a lot of other stuff looks bad on offense as a result. So I think you look at a key to this offensive group, that's got to be it.
I think you have to look at the portal this summer to at least see who's available, even if it's just two deep help, because there's a lot of freshmen in the two deep right now. There are guys backing up starters who, in a normal situation, I don't think would be in the two deep. There was a walk-on offensive tackle in the two deep the last time I was at practice. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but I would definitely look out there and see what's available. That was something that Joe Rudolph apparently was not a fan of, was transfer portal recruiting. So you saw there was no depth last year, and then there were no portal guys signed this past winter, and then Rudolph left. So there's generally not as much talent available in the summer as there is in the winter. But I would have to think that maybe that Tech could find someone who could help in some way, even if it's just with depth, because what they've got right now, it's a lot of youth, and I think Cade Moore's a good player, but he's switching positions. I don't think there's like a third true offensive tackle. I think their third offensive tackle right now is the kid from Southwest Virginia,
Meadows.
Yeah, Brody Meadows, and I think he's more of a guard in my view. It's certainly not a left tackle. I would rather have him at right tackle.
It might be Schick.
Yeah,
Schick might be that swing guy.
He could be.
They move him outside, then Hansen comes up, or Hansen could be the starter for all we know. He's still in the mix for them.
It certainly could be, and Schick was at right guard today again, and he's been battling out there with Hansen. But even then, like, Schick's not a true tackle, you know. So your only other, I don't know if they would have a third guy that I would classify as a true tackle. I thought it would be Johnny Garrett, but they've been working him at guard.
I think he was at some tackle today.
Yeah, okay.
So still in the mix there.
Still trying to figure it
They started
out.
Laith Ganem out on the left
Right.
side at tackle. I
Yep.
think that's where they envision him in the future. But again, very young.
And
This whole group just very young.
it really is, and you got to keep in mind that Crook didn't recruit any of these guys, and he's still getting used to their strengths and weaknesses as a player. Like he walked on campus, and then 3 days later, practice started. He probably didn't even know everybody's names by the first day of practice, right? So how's he supposed to know what position to play them?
That's why they put that tape on the front of the helmets with the names on it.
It's like a name tag for the first day of school, right? So yeah, I think I would like to see them be able to find some help on the offensive line in the portal this summer if possible. And I know they've got to get down to 85, but offensive line is such a key position that if they're able to find somebody there, I would do that.
It wouldn't surprise me if they didn't. I mean, it's tough to find guys in the portal,
Yeah,
especially on the offensive line, because I mean, there's a glut of receivers and defensive backs and smaller guys, but the big guys are in short supply
they are
because everybody needs five.
Well,
of them.
especially in the summer.
Right.
They're available in the winter. So like Duke's offensive line last year, one of the reasons they got so much better is they had 3 new starting offensive linemen that they got from the portal last offseason. But they are at a premium. So you've got to really make that a focus of your recruitment in the offseason, and that's not something Virginia Tech did with Joe Rudolph as offensive line coach, and it remains to be seen whether that's something that Ron Crook is interested in.
I'd point out that I think what Duke did last year was rare.
It
I
is.
think that's very much
is.
the exception to the rule.
It is.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting to note too that I know a lot of the guys are young, but there are a few of those guys that this is their third offensive line coach in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been so much change. I mean, that's one of, I guess the staff's shifted around so much that pretty much everybody on the offensive side of the ball has a new position coach except for wide receivers. But like running back, I guess kind of the same way, but like for a lot of these offensive linemen, for a group that struggled a lot, this is for a couple of those guys, I guess like a Jesse Hansen or a Parker Clements, this is their third offensive line coach in 3 years. Just something to keep in mind.
I want to ask this. What is your biggest concern about this team right now?
Oh my goodness. From a player personnel standpoint.
No, we're going to get into player personnel next. If you had one overhanging concern, what would it be?
Is the offensive coordinator good enough or not? I guess we'll find out.
Well, I'm not going to. I mean, that's the obvious. That's boring if I just say the same thing as him. I will say defensive front. I think you look at that part, you feel pretty comfortable with this secondary and the cornerbacks they have there. Is there something they can do with this defensive front to get after the quarterback better? Because they were not very good at it last year, and they lost a couple guys on the defensive line. Taiwan Garbage, Jalen Griffin are out of that group. So how do they get after the quarterback? Can Cole Nelson, C.J. McCray, Keyshawn Burgos, those guys there at end, get to the quarterback? Can they get pressure from the tackles? Do they have to blitz a lot from the linebackers? I'm not sure, and I don't have the answer, certainly. But does Brent Pry have the answer for this defense and find a way to dial up some pressures and get after the quarterback? Because if you don't, that just lessens the impact of your secondary. If they have to cover guys for 3 or 4 seconds out there, they become a lot less effective. So you're not going to win many games in college football these days without having an effective front that can cause some disruption, and you didn't see a ton of that last year.
In terms of personnel, what position group do you feel most comfortable with and most uncomfortable with?
I feel very comfortable with the cornerbacks on defense. I think Virginia Tech has 3 quality players there. And then they're bringing in some guys from this past recruiting class. I think guys like Dante Lovett, he's a guy who could potentially contribute early. Braylon Johnson, I think, is skilled enough to and smart enough to. He's got to get a little bit bigger, but I like their overall talent level at cornerback in the program from top to bottom. We just talked about the offensive line, so I can't really say that. I'm a little more concerned about running back than most people, and I only developed that view after an open practice last week where we got to stay for the entire practice, and Tootin had some ball security issues, whether it was fumbling or catching it or whatever. Now we get to see so little of practice. That was one practice, and then we've gotten to see no more than 20 minutes of any other practice. That might have been the only practice the entire spring he's had any sort of ball security issues. Like, unless you're in there every day, you don't know. But if that is an issue for him, and then your backup is Malachi Thomas, who has been banged up throughout the course of his career, that's a concern, because Virginia Tech has to run the football. I mean, Brent Pry has made that the biggest emphasis of the offseason, is what it seems like to me, with the direction I believe that they're trying to take the offense to a more RPO packaged play style of offense. So they're going to need, I think both those guys are good enough. It's just whether, one, can Thomas stay healthy, and can Tootin hold on to the ball. So I need to see that. I think the running back production this year is going to be extremely important when it comes to the offense taking a step forward. So to me, that's something that I really want to see. I would like, not that you can necessarily tell a lot from the spring game, but it would be nice to see one of those guys, hit a crease and then bust a big gain, because big gains in the running game were few and far between last season for Tech.
I'm less concerned about the running backs than you. I look at that. I mean, Tootin, it's 1 30-minute period where he had some slippery hands there versus an entire body of work of what he had last year at North Carolina A&T. I generally will give a guy some slack when you're comparing those two time frames of production there. I think him and Thomas, I mean, when Thomas was healthy last year, he looked good. And he looked like a guy that could move the pile. And you saw the kind of difference he made early in that Pitt game. I mean, it was like, okay, this guy's back and he can do some things out there. I think you have that 1-2 punch there, and that takes some pressure off the rest of the guys from having to step up and be the guy there. So I think I'm okay there. I mentioned it before, defensive end, I think, is a concern from my perspective in terms of production you can get there. Offensive line, the trenches. I mean, that is where football is won. I know all the attention gets to the skill guys and stuff like that, but for the mentality and the mindset that Pry wants to have with this team on both sides of the ball, it's got to start down on the lines, and those groups need to be better.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for episode 292 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, presented by First Bank and Trust Company, as well as Virginia Green. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, and we'll see you next time on the Tech Sideline Podcast.